studios in New York City. This is Charlie Rose.
Tonight, a conversation with an extraordinary journalist at a transition point in his career. Ted Koppel has been the anchor of Nightline since 1980 when he took over for the late Frank Reynolds. The program began as a daily update on the Iran hostage crisis. Koppel and the Nightline staff developed it into an in-depth analysis of a single news story. Here is a look at some of the memorable moments from his 25 years on the program.
Good evening. This is a new broadcast in the sense that it is permanent. I understand. I understand the rationale.
I think I'm entitled. Well, but you just don't like my answer.
No, what I'm saying is I find your answer...
You asked the question, but you don't like the answer. What do you want me to say?
I find the answer inconsistent with the evidence is what I'm saying,
well,
Mr. Vice President.
That's your opinion. Dan, I'll take all the credit, all the blame for that.
Dan's the other fella.
I mean, Ted.
I think there's still a long way to go, and this kind of campaign, 13 days, is a very long time. And
no, it's not. 13 days is almost nothing. In one sense, with all due respect, let me suggest to you, I still don't think you get it. This is a man nursing a commanding lead who expects to win his party's nomination. Is there such a fundamental vanity that says, I really could do a better job at leading this country than any of those other turkeys that I see out there?
I'm sure there's somebody better out there. They haven't chosen to run. The field is what it is.
Let me ask you both, why do you love each other? Jack?
This is the most special human being I've ever met in my life. This man has more love and compassion inside of him than a football stadium full of people.
It has claimed more lives than all the other current wars around the world combined.
You'd think we would have noticed, would have raised an uproar, demanded an investigation.
3 years, 2.5 million dead. We thought someone should tell you.
You're narcissistic.
I'm too ugly to be narcissistic.
I thought you was a narcissist when I saw you on TV.
Why is that?
Because you acted as if you knew everything. And I said to your crew today, this is going to be a tough one for him because he doesn't know anything about dying.
That's true. I was trying to think of something that would be appropriate to say on an occasion like this, and as is often the case, the best you can come up with is something that Shakespeare wrote for Henry V, wreak havoc and unleash the dogs of war. And there they start moving into Iraq.
Ted Koppel represents the mentality of white racism in America. I heard him refer to all of the giants in our community as you people.
I can understand if you think that every single white man, woman, and child in this country has a tinge of racism in them, but you've also got to believe that there are gradations. Some of us are worse than others, some of us are better than others, and if we're ever going to have a dialogue with one another, if we're ever going to reach our hands out to one another, you can't lump us all together any more than we can lump you all together. That's our report for tonight. For all of us here at ABC News, this is Ted Koppel in Mogadishu, Little Rock, Wilmington, Delaware, Moscow. We'll be back in Washington next week. I'm Ted Koppel in Ramallah. For all of us here at ABC News, good night.
Koppel was born in 1940 in Lancashire, England, the son of German Jews who had fled the Nazis. He moved with his family to the United States at the age of 13 and graduated from Syracuse University and then received a master's in communication from Stanford. He began his career on ABC Radio in 1963. He later covered the Vietnam War for ABC Television News and in 1971 was named diplomatic correspondent. In 1980, he became the principal anchor for Nightline. 11 years later, in 1991, Tom Battag joined Nightline as executive producer and helped to push the broadcast into new directions. They became best friends and tomorrow night leave together for new endeavors. Ted has been a guest on this broadcast many times, and we have discussed everything. Here is a look at some of those conversations.
Because I had to be very, very young when Ed Murrow was broadcasting. Yeah. I mean, if I was 3 or 4 years old, my father was listening to some of these Murrow broadcasts which were being rebroadcast on the BBC. And one of my earliest childhood memories is thinking, and I can't even have known with any real sense of clarity of what the man was doing. But I thought, boy, that sounds good. I like the idea of doing that. And I have never, I mean, I never went through the fireman stage. I never went through the stage of wanting to be a doctor.
It was always the Murrah stage.
I always wanted to be a foreign correspondent. That's all I ever wanted to do.
Did you feel you got too close to Henry Kissinger?
Not in the sense that, I mean, all those who have suggested that I did over the years, and Henry Kissinger and I did become friends and are to this day friends, have never been able to point to anything that I reported or any questions I asked or did not ask him as being anything more or less than they would have wished for. But there is sort of this impression that because we are friends, that would have been the case, or that's why he appeared on Nightline as often as he did. He hasn't been on in a long time now. You know, if I had to do it over again, I wouldn't, simply because it's a question of perception.
Do you have the same worldview?
We have a very similar worldview, and I think that may have something to do with having similar backgrounds.
How would you characterize that?
Well, it's that terrible German word, Realpolitik.
Realpolitik.
Yeah. I think we both look at foreign policy as being something, well, I know he does, and I know I do. Whether I got it from him, I don't think I did. The people who make foreign policy are obliged, because of their roles, not to do it very often on the basis of morality. They do it on the basis of what is best for the government or the country that they represent. And sometimes that requires amoral, even immoral decisions. More amoral than immoral. That's one reason why I'm not sure, to get back to some of the questions you were asking me earlier on, whether I would ever really be able to be a policy maker. One of the luxuries of doing what we do is that we're not obliged to make those decisions. We're not obliged to make decisions that can send, you know, a division of young men and women off into combat, where some of them are going to die. Now, what a terrible thing to have to do. And yet those kinds of things have to be done by leaders. The marketplace of ideas and treating those ideas with care really is a public trust. We use that notion, both in politics and in journalism, of public trust more as a shield to defend ourselves against accusations of shoddiness or people who might try to inhibit what we do. I prefer to think of that public trust as a very, very heavy responsibility that we bear, and I'm not altogether sure that we bear it that well.
Because?
Because there's too much money in it, there is too much fame and glory in it, and even where there isn't money in it, the influence, or at least the perceived influence, of someone who has access to a few minutes on this medium every day is such that it allows people to forget about the necessary steps. You know, it's too easy now for a 25-year-old or a 27-year-old to become an anchor at a local station because they look right, they sound right, and you know, they can read without stumbling. That's not journalism. And, you know, the idea of becoming an anchor, the idea of hosting a program like this, without, you know, you've earned those furrows in your forehead and those lines under your eyes. You know, you didn't just come here as another pretty face, and you've worked hard over the years, and it's, you know, it takes some of that. This ought to be, if not the culmination of a career, it ought to be something you do in the last 20 years of your career, not the first 20 years of your career. And I think we've got that all ass backwards.
How do you see the power that comes from television and the exercise of that power? Knowing that that because of your influence of the program that can bring to bear, and how do you wield that and exercise that power?
You don't. The power as I think you know, and I'm not sure most people who watch television quite believe this, is a paradox in the sense that you have power only until you decide to exercise it. As soon as someone in our business decides that as an anchorman or anchorwoman, he or she is going to go out and support a cause or slay a dragon, you know, come out for or against one candidate or the other. The minute you begin to do that, and you are perceived as doing that, you lose your power. Our power rests ultimately, and again, I know this is not a popular thing for people to believe in this day and age, but our power rests in at least our effort to be as honest and objective as we can be, and as fair as we can be. And to those who are watching tonight who doubt that that's the way it works, what makes you angry out there is when one of us goes after someone that you like, that you support. When we're going after someone that you don't like, you're cheering us on. And it is the fact that we do both over the long haul and are willing to continue doing both over the long haul. You know, people are always cheering us on when their guy or gal is on the outside trying to get in, and when we're going after the person who is in power. And the only time they feel that we are totally biased and bigoted is when we're going after their person who is on the inside, and they feel that we would not have done that if someone else were on the inside.
Of all the things that you have done, what is closest to you? What is most memorable for you? Is it Nightline? And professionally, clearly, but what is most, you know, conversations with people like Maury that... What has shaped you the most?
I'm gonna quote another member of the Bush family now, Barbara Bush, who you know, who once said, "Nobody on their deathbed ever lies there saying, I wish I'd spent more time at the office."
That's right. That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
Another profound truth. So yes, I mean, what is it that excites me? What excites me is all of a sudden you hop on a plane and you zip over to Jerusalem and you do a town meeting, and it could go terribly and it could go well, and there's a great sense of drama about it. But 10 years from now, is that what I'm going to be thinking about? I don't think so either. No. I don't think so. I think the most profound thing in my life has been and continues to be a lasting relationship with one woman that has gone on now for 40 years. I cannot imagine being without her. I cannot imagine trying to have a relationship. And when I say relationship, I don't mean a sexual relationship. I mean a relationship, one human being to another, with another woman. Because there are so many things that we communicate about. I mean, we finish sentences for one another all the time because she knows exactly what's in my mind, and I know exactly what's in her mind. And there are times when that can be very frustrating. Will you let me finish my own sentence?
Yes.
For God's sake, right?
And don't be so...
Right. You know, you don't know it all.
Yeah, exactly.
I do have something new to say. You know?
Last week I sat down with Ted at the famous Nightline set from which he will anchor the broadcast for the last time tomorrow night. Here is that conversation.
What? Why are you doing this? Why are you stepping down?
There's a time for everything. There's a right time for everything. I think that this is the right time. It's the right time to do something different. I've been here at ABC 42 years. They have been glorious. I've had a marvelous time. I have no complaints. I'm not leaving with even a hint of a huff. I'm a very happy man, but I think it's time to do something else.
Because?
Because there are changes in the offing. The nature of the business has changed somewhat. The level of competition has changed an awful lot. And that competition, I mean, Charlie, you know, although you do most of your work for PBS, I guess you watch other television programs every once in a while. People think that television exists to create programming. It doesn't. It exists to create advertising.
So now you're complaining about ratings.
And well, it's not just ratings. It's demographics. It's the tremendous pressure that everybody feels to be able to appeal to the right demographic, because that's what Madison Avenue wants. Madison Avenue needs.
Are you saying, I realized that we were swimming against the tide?
We've been swimming against the tide for a long time. I would say that Nightline has been swimming against the tide probably for about most of its 25 years.
But there were years in which you were number one.
There were quite a few years in which we were number one. More to the point, even when we were number two, which we were most of the time, we were still making a ton of money. I mean a ton of money. Mm-hmm. And as long as you make a ton of money, that is protection against, that's like, remember Wonder Woman's magic amulets, I mean, bullets, and it didn't make any difference.
It didn't matter. You could do anything as long as the cash flowed in.
As long as the cash flowed in, you can do anything. And so the cash is not flowing in as, the river of green has sort of turned to a modest trickle. And the fact of the matter is, as you will appreciate, because you and I are more or less of the same generation.
Right. We are of the same generation.
The older you get, especially when you've been with one company for a long time, the more money you make. So you've got these two lines on a graph, and they begin to intersect. And the lines look like this. Salary keeps going up, income for the program keeps going down. That's not a good trend. That's not a trend that encourages great corporations.
Is it possible they could have shaped a Nightline that would have kept you here? And did you participate in those kinds of conversations?
Well, David Weston, whom you've had on your program, the president of ABC News, and I had very warm and friendly discussions about just that. And it was clear to me that David believes that the best thing that can happen to Nightline is that it would ultimately go to an hour, because then it can bring in more money, and also that it be live again, and that whoever does it, do it 5 days a week. He was generous enough to say to me at that time, ideally, I'd love to have you do that. But I think he knew when he said that to me that was a non-starter.
Because you didn't want to work 5 days a week? They let 5 days and live stand in the way of Ted Koppel staying at a legendary broadcast.
I don't know that is so. I mean, that was what David said he wanted to do. Now,
but didn't you try to point out to David that that's not a very smart idea? Because you can.
It may turn out to be a smart idea.
What are you going to do now, or after November 22nd?
Charlie, I hold this old-fashioned view that until the divorce decree is final from your first wife, you don't start talking about the second wife.
Fair enough.
Which is a very poor analogy, which my wife of 42 years...
Grace Ann will get on you tonight, I hope.
That's right,
so you and Batag leave as a couple.
Yes.
And after you leave here, Koppel and Batag will set up shop and go in business.
There will be further announcements. We will alert,
but are you saying that you have had no conversations about what the future will be? Not you, not Tom?
No.
About
what I'm saying is I will have no further conversations with you about about those further conversations.
Oh, you have had conversations?
Of course.
But, okay,
of course,
great.
Yes, which is perfectly legitimate. I'm allowed to do that.
Okay, but the big rumor is that you're going to go do a series of specials for HBO.
I've heard that rumor.
All right. It is also said that you turned down Sunday morning. ABC wanted you to go and take the Sunday morning program and make it your program. They've been saying that for a number of years. Why doesn't Ted go to Sunday morning and bring his interviewing skills to that position? It is no reflection on George or anyone else to say they wanted you to do this for a long time.
They have.
So why don't you want to do that?
Because it doesn't excite me.
Because it's...
Doesn't excite me.
You had... My impression is that you love foreign policy.
Yeah.
You and some big issues. Race, AIDS, global health.
All those things.
You're not that fascinated by domestic politics.
Also true. Although there are times, there are times,
Rare.
this is one of them, when I think domestic politics is kind of interesting.
Because of the president.
I think,
and the crisis he's going through right now.
I think, you know, whenever an administration goes through difficult times, whenever anybody goes through difficult times, you know, the jackals of the news industry, you know, prick up their ears, begin to salivate lightly. Those are good times for us. Those are interesting times.
When you look at politics today and what the president is going through, you believed what about the Iraqi war in terms of the decision to go?
I wasn't sure that it was the right time to go. I didn't for a moment doubt that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. I wasn't convinced that even in the hands of Saddam Hussein, that those weapons presented a direct challenge to the United States. Based on my own discussions with people who have access to intelligence, I did not believe, never did, don't believe it now, that there was a real connection between Al-Qaeda and Saddam Hussein. You know, may some Al-Qaeda people or known terrorists have made it into Baghdad at some time or another? Sure. They've also made it into Damascus, and they've made it into Amman, and they've made it into Cairo, and
Riyadh,
you know,
and a lot of other capitals.
And we can't expect to go to war against every one of those countries. So the big question was the weapons of mass destruction. And my feeling was I could not think of a single reason why Saddam Hussein would be foolish enough to employ any of those weapons against the United States of America directly.
Because it would be suicide.
It would be suicidal. Might he employ them against the Saudis? Sure. We thought he was going to do that back in 1990 before Desert Storm.
After Kuwait?
After Kuwait.
Right into Saudi Arabia.
You know, I mean, certainly he had shown that he had the capacity to be aggressive against his neighbors. He had indeed used weapons of mass destruction, poison gas, against some of his own people, Kurdish Iraqis. But he did that, Charlie, back in 1988 in a place called Halabja. And that was when the Reagan-Bush administration was in power. And frankly, nobody seemed to care back then, because he was our SOB. He was perceived to be a useful balance against the Iranians and the crazy mullahs. So back then, nobody really cared. So to hear George Bush's son, you know, some 12 years later or whenever, 13 years later, suddenly cite that as one of the reasons why we had to go to war, I couldn't see that there was any real urgency.
Did you find another reason that you thought was compelling to go to war, if not now, in 3 months or 4 months?
Not to go to war. I'm not sure that I would have gone to war, but now that we have done so, I don't see how we can easily extract ourselves. My concern is that if we pull out precipitously, it may undermine the security of the entire Persian Gulf. You don't really have that stable a regime in Saudi Arabia. The Kuwaitis, you know, could be tossed over by a sharp breath of air. And the Iranians are problematic, at least. So what do we have to guarantee stability in the Persian Gulf except a presence in Iraq right now, and someday, one hopes, an Iraq that is stable enough and strong enough and independent enough that it can serve as a stabilizing force, as Iran once did when the Shah was alive, as Saudi Arabia once did 10, 15 years ago. But there is no country right now in that region that serves that purpose. And I realize it's unfashionable to say that we will ever spill blood for oil, but the fact of the matter is that our economy is totally dependent on that, as is the economy of the Europeans, as is the economy of the Japanese.
So real politics demands that we be there, or that we make sure that we have some capacity to maintain the access to those oil fields.
Exactly.
Looking back over this extraordinary career, where do you think you were best? What brings you the greatest sense of the story you want your grandchildren to know about?
You will understand this, Charlie, because, and maybe I'm misjudging you, I don't know. I suspect you're not great at anything else. I mean, you know,
You've been reading my mail, as Chris Christopherson would say.
You're not secretly a great heart surgeon or something.
No.
There is something about what you and I do that is inexplicable. I mean, a lot of people will nod their heads and agree with that. But, I mean, inexplicable in the sense that I can't sort of take it apart piece by piece and say, well, I'm good at this because A, B, C, and D. I just know that I have the capacity, together with a number of other very talented people, to get up at 5:30 in the morning in a strange country, in a strange place when dangerous things are happening, and sort of head out on the road and start gathering pieces of string. And usually around 11 in the morning or 12 or 1 in the afternoon, a theme begins to develop, and you can begin to write. And by the time we go on the air that night, we've got a really good program.
Absolutely.
Really good. And I'm not altogether sure how we do it. I do know it might be a little better if we had 2 days to do it, but probably not. There is a combination of being able to respond in a creative way to pressure, being able to write quickly, working with, you know, cameramen and women who are just indefatigable and are able to capture all those images. I mean, any one of us who's a lousy photographer or a lousy cameraman knows what it's like to come back after a vacation and, you know, develop the pictures. I mean, now with the digital cameras, you can see right away. But to come back and develop those pictures and say, damn, I sort of missed it. I missed that great moment that I thought I had captured. Well, these camera people that we go with, and the producers and the editors, and all of us working together under tremendous pressure, time pressure, produce these programs. That's what I do. That's what I'm good at. And sitting, you know, with someone like you know, you and I could just as easily, you know, switch chairs.
Absolutely.
And I could do the Charlie Rose story, and we'd have just as much fun doing it.
Absolutely. I mean, it's interesting when I think about it, because what happened, you and I came to this from different places. I came from Duke, you came from Stanford via Syracuse, you came from an early beginning. I went through law school before I got involved. I started off with Bill Moyers. You started immediately and went to Vietnam right away. But we come and we have shared the same real estate for almost the last 15 years, which is the idea of every day getting up and saying, what is it that I can add context to, and where is there an important need to have a dialogue? We approach it differently, but to come at, hopefully, truth.
Right.
That's what it's about.
And, you know, I mean, you can phrase it in a less altruistic fashion. I always phrase it by saying, get up in the morning and say, who's the most interesting person I could be talking to today? What's the most interesting story out there?
That is the question every morning.
What is the most exciting place we could go to? And then going and doing it.
And therefore, if you were telling me that you were leaving this not to do it again, I would have a hard time believing it. But you're saying I'm leaving to choose a different approach to doing the same thing, applying that curiosity to another place in another context.
See, you weaseled it out of me.
I did. I got it out of you. All right. Regrets about this Nightline thing in terms of where you think, God, I missed it that day. I didn't go, or we talked a little bit about this notion of whether we all could have been tougher, raised better questions about war and peace with respect to Iraq, should they have waited, all of that. There have been questions. I mean, you and I share another passion, which is the passion about race and civil rights in America. There are things that we don't necessarily have the same. You have more of a passion about prisons and prison reform than I do. I may be more curious about books than you are, or something, I don't know. But tell me about race and how you feel about it as a defining curiosity and interest of your life?
It's more than a curiosity. I've told a number of African American friends, I cannot imagine what it must be like to be an African American in this country. I cannot, I mean, it's the little insults and slights, the sometimes unintended offense that is given, and something that you really have to learn from earliest childhood on. There is just a certain amount of crap that you're going to have to learn to put up with if you're going to grow up black in this country. It's just going to happen to you. And I don't care, we have made huge progress. I understand that. We've made huge progress in the time that you and I have been alive. And it's a better country today in terms of race relations than probably it has ever been before. Nevertheless, there's a sociology professor out on Long Island who does an experiment with his class every year. Comes in, says, okay, folks, just sort of bear with me now. As of 5 minutes from now, all of you are African American. All of you. This happened because a giant corporation that I happen to represent, huge, multi-billion-dollar corporation, made a mistake. Be that as it may, you're all now African American. The corporation, however, wants to do the right thing by you. How much is it going to be worth to you? For the rest of your life, you're going to be black. What do you want in compensation? And the kids start coming about, I don't know, $1 million, $10 million, $50 million. And then he begins to analyze with them, why? I mean, what is it that makes you feel that if a white man like you suddenly tomorrow were black, and it was somebody else's fault that that happened, that they would owe you money? Interestingly, by looking at it that way, he's able to get past all the sort of easy defenses that we put up and say, oh, there isn't really any big
We instinctively know.
We know in our heart of hearts that life would be different, that life would be more difficult for us, that there would be certain benefits that we now enjoy that we might not enjoy. That just infuriates me.
Me too. When I grew up in the South, and you covered the South,
yep.
Why is it, do you think? Why is it such, you go back to Gunnar Myrdal, to go back to de Tocqueville, it has always been the American dilemma.
It's a universal dilemma. I can't think of
Seen
the
in
author.
Paris right now.
Yeah, I mean, and it doesn't necessarily have to do with black and white.
Yeah.
You know, for example, the Danes and the Finns and the Swedes, you know, are tremendously prejudiced people, not against blacks, because for the most part there never were any blacks in Scandinavia, but against each other. There is a wonderful author whose name I cannot think of right now who did some great detective novels, and in there he writes about some of these great bigotries that exist in the Scandinavian world against some of the natives, Eskimos. I don't, you know, I'm going down a path that I can't define for you. My only point, though, is that racism seems to exist just about everywhere. There seems to be something in the human animal that requires, in some people, that they have the opportunity to look down on someone else.
How concerned are you about the whole commingling, or the one side, no clear division between entertainment values and news values?
Yeah, I think that's a problem. And I say that as someone who, for 25 plus years here at Nightline, has always made the argument that there is no such thing as a bad subject. There is nothing we cannot cover on this program. And Lord knows, you know, Jim and Tammy Faye Baker, oh, what a wonderful story
Yes,
that
was.
was.
It was.
Sleazy?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was sleazy, but, you know, it also had some real important issues.
And it said something powerful about how money and religion had come to a certain
and
point.
sex and
sex.
religion.
There is There is also this idea of technology and what it's doing to us. You have been conversant with that. If you talk to people today, we are going to be seeing what we do in a whole range of ways never seen before.
Right. You remember the Luddites?
Yes.
I'm a Luddite. I'm by inclination, I'm a Luddite.
I don't believe that for a second.
Truly.
Because
truly,
A, you've done programs about this. B, I'll bet you, this is why I don't believe you're a Luddite, I'll bet you that you and Tom Batak have your hand on and a deep understanding of how technology offers new opportunities
it's a good thing
to distribute programs.
It's a good thing we're in a soundproof studio, or you would hear the snorting and giggling of members of my staff out there who are saying, Koppel, not a chance.
Do you email every day?
No.
You don't do that?
Not unless I have to.
Okay.
I mean, I consult my email 3 or 4 times a week, whether I have to or not.
Is that right?
Yes, it is. I do not carry a BlackBerry, refuse to carry a BlackBerry.
And that's where you and I part company.
Yeah. Now, let me explain to you...
That probably says something more valuable about you than me.
Let me explain to you why I am intrinsically suspicious about all this technology. The most enduring piece of information that has ever been communicated throughout the history of man was carved, some people believe, by the finger of God into 2 stone tablets.
10 Commandments.
10 Commandments. They have survived thousands of years. The drivel that comes gushing out of this high technology, whether it's on your phone or whether it's on your BlackBerry or whether it's on your cable television set or whether it's coming over satellite or however it's coming, the technology is not what's important. What's important is what is communicated.
But remember what I said when I phrased this question, is that there are a whole range of ways that you can communicate your content.
Right.
You know, in a way to reach a broader audience. One of the great things that you can do now, and that because of people like me, if we're on at the hour that you and I have been on,
we can TiVo it.
We can TiVo it.
Exactly.
That's technology.
That's technology.
And that's technology to be welcomed.
I have no problem with that. And there are...
You seem to know about it, too.
And I do. But
no Luddite on
TiVoing. There are people out there who will worry about that. You and I, Charlie...
We're about the content.
We're about the content.
I agree.
And when people start putting more emphasis on the medium through which the information is communicated than they do on the information that's being communicated, we've lost something very important.
I saw a piece the other day on your online. See, I even read Nightline Online.
I don't.
You and Charlie, well, you wrote it, you and Charlie Chaplin. You know, you said,
Oh,
I'm not necessarily a Charlie Chaplin fan, but your program was going to do something about Charlie Chaplin because the British Film Association. Just a sense of what culturally what your sources are. Do you go to the movies a lot?
Love the movies, yeah. I mean, I don't get to go as often as I would like to.
Have you seen Good Night and Good Luck?
I have. I have.
Have you seen Capote, for example?
I have not, although one of my daughters has and thinks it's great, and I'm going to go see it. I just reread In Cold Blood about a month ago.
In anticipation of the movie, or just because you thought it changed journalism?
No, just because I was at an airport and I saw it and I hadn't read it in 40 years, and I thought.
What else are you reading? Have you read any books that you say, wow?
Patrick O'Brien wrote a series of 20 great Napoleonic era sea novels. Wonderful, wonderful novels. And I sort of ripped my way through all 20 or 21 of those, and then was looking around for something and realized I'd never read Forrester's books on Horatio Hornblower, which are every bit as good. And there are 11 of those. Well, I'm on number 11 right now.
I just had somebody on my program who is director of the Royal Shakespearean Academy, Royal Dramatic Academy. I've forgotten the name of it. Anyway, this guy made Shakespeare so come alive. I mean, it was the joy. And that's why, you know, my definition of my program, it is what is it that you're curious about? And it is a broad sense of what is news and where our curiosity takes us.
You bet.
It's not just the breaking news story. And I've noticed at Nightline over the last maybe under Tom Batag's influence and yours, has become to have a broader definition of what it is you want to tell stories about?
It has to, for the simple reason that there is such constant emphasis, as I was saying before, on cable in particular, on everything that purports to be so damn important today and that we can barely remember.
And everything that is so breaking news, as they say.
Exactly.
When you think about this chair that you've had, what do you think has been the style that you have brought to this business? Because most people, critics, fans, colleagues, believe that you do this as well as anybody has ever done it. The idea of asking a question and a follow-up.
You're gracious to put it that way, but for you to be asking that question is unnecessarily modest on your part, because you do exactly the same thing. You and I both believe that an interview is really nothing more than a condensed conversation. I mean, you know, most conversations have the, have the freedom to go on perhaps for an hour or 2 hours or a whole evening if you're lucky and it's a good conversation. On television, you have to condense it. But the important thing that so many people who are interviewers don't get, and you do, is you have to listen to what people say in response to your questions. That often leads in the most interesting directions. And I find nothing more frustrating than to be sitting there with someone who's got a list of questions.
I know.
And, you know, he could say, you know, so what have you done lately, Ted? Well, I just murdered 3 of my children. Okay, and you're going where? Is it true that you're going to HBO?
Yeah.
I just told you I murdered 3 of my children. Yes, I heard that. It's, you know, nothing. There is not even a glimmer of intelligence in those interviews. And I hope, if I've contributed anything, it is the notion that an interview is not that different from a conversation. You ask a question, you get an answer. Sometimes the answer is unsatisfactory and you have to push a little bit further. These days, people are, especially politicians, but most people who are in the news, have become so skilled, usually through the advice of trainers, counselors, that it takes a mallet and a chisel to get past the BS and to actually get them to address a question. Television has become much more boring than it used to be, in large measure because nobody wants to give you a straight answer.
I want to go back to your beginnings briefly. Your parents escaped from Germany in 1938.
Yeah, I think my father left in 37, my mother in 38.
They had this, a Jewish family that saw what was coming and left.
They weren't a family yet. They weren't married. They married when they got to England.
And went to England.
Yeah.
You lived the first 13 years of your life there.
Right.
Then they came to America.
Right.
Why?
For my sake. They genuinely believed, and I think, remember, this is over 50 years ago, that the future in England for a young man whose parents were not from that country, who didn't have the right background, go to the right schools. In those days, I mean, I think things have improved a lot. Class had a lot to do with how far you could get in England in the 1950s. And my parents believed, apparently correctly, that opportunities in this country were still much greater. And they did it for my sake, not for theirs. I think it was quite difficult for them.
So my curiosity was whether you thought of yourself in any part English. You think there's still some vestiges, some part of you that's English?
Yes. I still get embarrassed by public displays of emotion. You know, it bothers me. I am uncomfortable around very loud people. I prefer understatement to overstatement. In those respects, I think they sort of pounded that into me in boarding school a long time ago. You know, Tom Batag and I are as close as brothers. Tom really believes that if somebody wants to do something, they should, pardon me, they should not only raise their hand, but they should come over and say, I'm the best person for this job. That's why you ought to give it to me. I would rather die than do that. I just think, you know, to push yourself forward that way. You know, in England, the Japanese are the same way. You know, the nail that stands up gets hammered down. It used to be that way in England too. I'm not sure how it is today. So in that respect, that part of me is still very much English.
Yet you always negotiated your own contracts.
I did.
You didn't send a lawyer, an agent, or somebody else.
Right.
And part of a negotiation is to say, this is my worth. This is...
Part of a negotiation is to say, I think I understand what I am worth to you. And not to in any way exaggerate that in your own mind. Part of a negotiation requires that you be able to hear directly rather than hearing it softened through an agent. You know, you arrogant SOB, we don't really need you that much. What makes you think? And to be able to say, I understand it, I appreciate it. Now can we, you know, can we set that aside and move on?
As you leave this stage and this transition to another chair.
Yeah, take a good look.
I know, there it is, Nightline, everywhere, Nightline.
They're going to strike the set.
You never wanted to call it the Ted Koppel.
Never did.
I'll bet you your name will be in whatever you do next.
Well, I used to have a company called KCI.
I know you did.
Koppel Communications.
When you look forward now, what are the stories that interest you the most? We are seeing, you know, the rise of Asia. You know, we're looking at some kinds of extraordinary cultural clashes, religious, coming to grips with an understanding of Islam in the world. Lots of things like that. What interests you?
All of those things, Charlie. I mean, it's, you understand, because if I turn the question around to you, you have such a voracious appetite. You're capable of sitting down with any turkey and getting him or her to give forth, and you're good enough at this that you recognize that almost everyone has a good story to tell. It's just a question of extracting it. There's no such thing as a bad story out there. There are only dumb ways of telling them. Years and years and years ago, I was at some ABC event out in Arizona, and I found myself sitting in a hot tub in the back of the hotel with some guy who recognized me, but I didn't know him.
Is it a steam room or a hot tub?
Hot tub.
All right.
And I said to him, so tell me, what do you do? And he said, well, he said, I have this company. We clean, we strip paint cans. And I said, you strip paint cans? Now, just leave it at that for one moment. Exciting? Not on the face of it.
Not at first glance.
Not at first glance. So he explained to me that he is able to take paint cans that have all kinds of paint all over them, and he developed this piece of equipment which is like a child's slide, right? It goes around and around and around. And he has something that pours thousands of ball bearings into the top of that slide, and they pick up speed by centrifugal force as they come down the slide, and then the big paint cans go by on a conveyor belt, and these ball bearings hit that paint can and strip it clean. And he gets these paint cans for free and sells them for half the price of a new paint can. And this guy has become a multi-millionaire.
That's a great story.
Now, when he was talking about those paint cans,
passion,
he was alive. I mean, those paint cans, cans been very, very
I say to people, find the passion within yourself and life will be good. I was once going from, when I was first starting, my first program that I did by myself, and I was driving from Fort Worth to Dallas. And a young man said, can I ride with you? And I said, sure. And he'd been at the station where I was broadcasting from. And he said, I have such admiration for you, and what you do is so exciting and interesting. You get to meet everybody. And I said, tell me about you. And he said, well, my life is boring and dull. Nothing's ever really happened to me. I said, well, where were you born? He said, well, I was born in Kansas, and then my parents were killed, and I was sent to live in a foster home. And I was beaten by the father, and I ran away. And then I was adopted by some religious fanatics. And I said, your life is not interesting? Come on. And there is a story.
Exactly.
And the gifted talent is to find those stories within people, and you do that better than anybody. The last broadcast on November 22nd is about Maury Schwartz.
Maury Schwartz.
Tuesdays with Maury. Why that as a final show?
Because Maury hit a universal chord in people, both through Mitch Albom's wonderful little book, Tuesdays with Maury, and with the 3 Nightline programs that he did with me before he died. And let's face it, we have only 2 things in common, all of us. We are born, we die. And most people love talking about birth. Very few people like talking about death, especially when it's their own, and especially when they're in the middle of dying. Maury gave us that gift. He was willing to talk about that. And it is, if not the most requested program, actually 3 programs that we have done over the past 25 years, it's certainly up there. And I thought, why not? So Mitch Albom and I had a long conversation about Maury, and a couple of my talented colleagues have edited all of that together with several of the segments of the interviews that I did with Maury, and it just seemed like a nice way to go out.
As we noted, tomorrow night is Ted's last broadcast as the anchor of Nightline. He moves on to new endeavors. There are a few times that I want people to watch another broadcast, but tomorrow night is a memorable night in the history of broadcast journalism. I can say this to a man who's received every honor that this industry can give. Simply these 2 words, well done, my friend. We look forward to many conversations at this table and other places in the years to come. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.